Hello, welcome back to WoodWorks. One of the first jobs you're going to be doing when you take on a project is planing a piece of wood square. And you're going to sometimes get rough stock that you're going to need to shave down to a smooth, planed all-round finish. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to set up a piece of timber and I'm going to show you how to get it square with a nice smooth finish, ready to go with your project. So when you've selected your stock that you're going to be using, this is rough sawn and it's a really rough finish. This one is a rough sawn, but the cut of it is a lot better. So whichever you're going to be using, whether it's rough stock or whether it's partially planed, it needs finishing before you start working into your project with it. Now there's a couple of things to look at, and firstly is the grain of the wood. And on here it has got some lines marked on it which are actually following the grain. Now if you plane the wrong way into the grain, it will tear out and you'll get a really rough finish. It'll be worse than when you've actually got a rough piece of stock. With this type of grain that we've got on the wood there, what we actually do is we plane from this side, and then this grain we plane from this side. The reason being is if you try to put the plane blade into the grain that way, what you're going to find is it's going to lift the end of the grain, it's going to tear it out. It will grab the end of the grain, it will pull it. What you need to be doing is coming along with the grain and following the grain. That way it'll feather it off nice and easy, nice and smooth. You get a better finish. Now you'll find a grain like this where there's been a knot in the wood, then you will get a curled grain. And that is the one that you need to work from either side. If you're on a straight, there's no knots in that part of the wood, look at the way the grain is flowing. If the grain is flowing, I'll just show you, and the grain is flowing up that way, then you need to be planing from this direction to avoid the blade going under the fibres and lifting them and curling them back. So you need to be planing in that direction. And as I said, when you come up where you've got opposing grain, you take the cut from either side to get the smooth finish. So next thing we're going to be talking about is the two planes that we're going to be using today. The number 4 plane, you can go for the slightly wider one, which is a 4.5, a 5, or as this one is, a 5.5. The difference being, as you can see, is the width of the two planes. This one is a 2.5 inch and this is about, I think, 3 inch. You've got two different widths of plane that you'll be using. Okay, so the two planes we're going to be using, firstly is going to be a jack plane, and the jack plane has been set up with a scrub blade in it, and the scrub blade is a really coarse cut. It's for taking off really harsh fibres. When we turn this over, if you look at the blade has actually got a curve over the width of the blade. It's not, there's no straight in the blade. It's a 1/32 curve right the way across. So the only place that this blade will cut is in the centre third. So that section, the centre third, is where this blade is at its optimum cut. When you actually are cutting your piece of timber, you're finding the high spot on your piece of timber, whether it's on one side or the other, and you're moving your blade across the wood to utilise that section in the middle. That will give you a really coarse cut. That will take off your really high spots. Now this is a number 5.5, and the width of this is 2 7/8 wide across the sole of the plane. So that is a jack plane that has been set up as a scrub plane. The other plane we're then going to be using is a number 4 smoothing plane. That is 2.5 inches across the width of the sole, and this blade has actually been sharpened absolutely level right the way across, with the two corners very carefully just taken off with a slight radius. That will stop any digging when you're putting the plane over your piece of timber for your final smoothing and finishing cut. That will give you a nice clean smooth finish on your timber. First thing I'm going to do is, before we use this piece of timber that I'm going to show you how to square up and get a good finish on, I'm going to use this one just to show you how coarse a cut you can get with a scrub plane, and that is the 5.5 jack. So I will show you very quickly how coarse this will cut and the amount of timber that it will take off in one fell swoop. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take a scrub cut, and the scrub cut will go from one end to the other with a good heavy push behind it, and it will take just a small piece off on the first cut, the second cut, and then when it actually starts to pick up on the next cut, you'll see it taking more and more off every time as it's cutting through the fibres. And there we go, right across it. Put plenty of weight behind it, good hard push, and that will cut a lot of heavy timber straight off. Really coarse, thick cuts, very, very heavy cuts, so quite solid. The next cut is with a number 4, and that's set really fine, and that is where we will start taking a lot finer shavings, and this is what is putting the finish on the timber. And as you cut your first couple of cuts, which become thinner, back your plane off slightly so you're getting a thinner, more wispier shaving. And again, as you can see, it's starting to get thinner. Back it out slightly more, and it's getting thinner. Back it out more until you're actually taking your finishing cuts of the loose fibres. That is very, very thin. So the difference between that and the other one is a marked difference, you can see. So as you can see, from a very rough face of timber to the piece we've just planed, it's fairly smooth, finished timber ready to work with. So now what we need to do is select a face on our timber that we're going to be using as our primary face. So this will be a face side, so that is going to be the wide face. And what we need to do is select the best one of the two rough sides. So we're going to do that by just holding a ruler against it to see if there's any gaps or anything down there, whether there's any slight throw out, and there's a little teeny gap in it. And again, diagonally, just to check. And then if you sight down the timber, you'll be able to see whether there's any twist in the timber from one end to the other. If the timber's twisted, we need to then be cutting opposing corners to level it. This piece isn't that bad, and I would say, yeah, that's got a curl in it. And when we actually look at the end of the grain as well, this is nearer to the heart. The curl lines are going that way, so this is nearer to the heart of the timber. You need to be looking at that because this will have a natural tendency to want to curve away from the heart. So the heart is up in the top corner here now, and we're going to use this as our primary face for smoothing. What we're going to do is check down the length of the timber using the straight edge across the timber to see whether there's any curvature in the timber that way. We'll just look along, see if there's any high spots, and pretty much almost level. There's a little high spot just a little bit about there. And then again, we're pretty good on that piece, so that's about the best face. So this is the one that we're going to take a pass over. We're not going to take a big heavy scrub cut off of that. We're going to just use a smoothing plane, just a couple of passes, and what we're going to do is going to angle the plane slightly at about 60 degrees to this edge. What that's going to give us is a shear cut, so it's going to allow the plane to cut a lot easier, a lot quicker and a lot smoother. So we're just going to try it. We're going to see whether we're going against the grain or with the grain. And as you can see, that piece there is where the high spot was. So we're just going to take a couple of passes over. That's just very fine cuts, just to level it. And we're going to work that until we get a nice even finish right the way across the whole piece of wood. Just working a shear cut from one side to the other. And as you look at the surface of the timber, you'll start to see the colour change in it as you start to get a nice even smooth cut across it. Once we've got that far, if we turn the plane round long ways, so you're going totally with the grain at 90 degrees to it, and again just work across it. Couple of cuts just to level it, and as you can see, nice thin wispy cuts. So again, if we now put our straight edge across it, draw our straight edge down, and if you can't see any light between the timber and the steel rule or the straight edge, you're pretty much flat. So that is our first cut, and that is the edge that we're going to designate as face side. So what we're going to do now is check the level of the timber with a steel rule, and this will tell us whether there's any bows and twists, and that is looking reasonably good and level. So the next thing we do is we remove the timber from the vise, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to use this side as edge, and if we run along that, we can see that it's pretty square to the edge. There's a little bit of a tip that way, so that means this edge is slightly out or this face is slightly out, so we need to square those next. It needs this side just a small amount taken off to bring it down, because what you probably find is that it's diagonally twisted that way, although that is pretty much straight. As it comes across, it is probably lifting. By sighting down that timber and looking down the length of the timber, we should be able to see that, and that has got a little lift on this corner, so that confirms what we need is to take this section off. So we're going to pop that back in the vise, get that set in there nicely, and we're just going to take a small cut off of this side, not all the way down, just off that side, just off that end bit, and then if we do one pass all the way down, all the way across to level it nice and equally. Again, we pop that out of the vise, check it with our square, and that is nice and square all the way down. There's no light showing through. Again, checking it with our steel rule, make sure it's nice and flat. And again, that is square in all planes, and if we just again sight down that, we can see that is actually dead square and level. There's no raise on this corner anymore. So we're now going to designate this as our face side, and what we're going to do is put our face side mark on it, which is that, which then means that this top edge is the one we're going to be using as our face edge. So it's face side, this will be our face edge. So we're just going to drop that back in the vise, and we know from using our square previously to level it, we know we're pretty square anyway, so we don't have to go too heavy on the cut on that. So we're just going to take a pass or two across there, just slightly skew the plane, and you should pull off a pretty much straight one piece cut. So we'll do that again, and if we can pull a nice ribbon off, we're cutting equally across the whole width of the timber and the whole length. So we can now, using the square on the face side, if we put the square onto that, and we check down it as we did before, we should find we've got a perfectly square and straight edge. Now that's perfectly square that side, and again if we look down that with a steel rule, there's no gaps under it, so we've got a nice flat surface. So we can now designate that as our face edge. So we've now got face side and face edge marks on there. So now we're going to be using our face side and our face edge as our reference points. And what we're going to do now, to gain the finish on this side and the squareness on this side, so it's relative to this face, what we're going to do is turn the timber round, and we are going to use the square from the face side, and we're going to check down this side for our squareness. And just checking that, I can see that there's a little bit of light showing under one side, so we need then to be taking a little bit off of that side. We had the light showing this side, so we need to take a little shaving off this side just to bring that square across there so it's not angled off on that face. So we're going to put that back into the vise, and we're going to take a cut across this high side. This side at the present is sitting slightly high. I think when we put the rule across it, there is, as I look through it, I can see down that side we have got a curvature in the wood that way. So we're going to hit that with a scrub plane first to take a good harsh cut off of that. And we're going to get that square, and we're going to use our fingers as a fence by putting them underneath against the wood, put the plane on top, and we're going to pinch the front of it just like that and try and keep it square. But we're going to move it slightly to the right, and if you remember what I was saying about it cutting on the centre of the blade, what we're going to do is move the centre of the blade to the right hand side of the wood on the high side, and that will taper across then to the left hand side where we need hardly anything cut. So we're going to give that one good cut right the way down there. It's a good harsh cut, and we're going to use our fingers as a fence to push it. So we keep holding that down, lean forward and give it a good hard cut right down that side. And because there's a knot there, it's taken a good push on the end to get that cut through. So we're going to do that once again. And as you can see, that was a good solid hard cut, and that is quite a heavy cut. We're then just going to put our ruler down it, and we can see that it's actually now taken that bow out of the piece of wood. It's just very lightly on either end, which we can get away with using the smoothing plane for. So we're going to take a small cut off of this end, a shear cut, 1, 2, 3, and off that side, 2, 3 off that side. We'll then put our ruler across it again, and that's taken the bow out of the wood almost. What we need to do is determine the distance between this side and that side all the way down the wood, and for that we use a marking gauge. So we're going to have the face edge again turned round. We're going to set up the width of our marking gauge, and we're going to set that just under the width of the timber. We'll dig that in, lock it off, and what we'll do is we'll score a line down that. All the way down on one side, on our face side, and then we're going to rotate that way so that we're still using the face edge. We're going to do the same on the other side. When we put the square across it, that is our square across the width. But because we've used the marking gauge to give us a line on both sides, marked from the same edge, the face edge, we know that when we plane down to these lines, we're going to wind up with a dead square all the way along. It's going to be parallel all the way down both sides of the timber. So we're going to set that back in our vise. There's going to be more of a cut required on that side than there is on this side. We're now going to move the plane to that side. So the centre of the scrub plane is on that side, and we're going to take one good pass down that, so that will bring us down equal distance between the edge and the line on that side as to that one. And now that's equal, we can then again switch back to our smoothing plane, and we can just gently work over that now until we start to split that line. And that is equal right the way across. And we're just coming down to the line. That's one more pass. We are now nicely on that line on both sides. We just split the line both sides, so that's perfect. We've got a nice even ribbon again, and when we remove that from the vise, if we put the square on it, you'll find that you're pretty much square all the way down, and the two sides are at 90 degrees. We then just do a reference check with the ruler, and we've got a nice straight level edge. There's no undulations in that side. So we've got our face side and our face edge done, and we've also got the opposing side, so we've got three faces done. What we're going to do now is, using the same method as we did before, using the marking gauge, we're going to set the marking gauge just shy of the thickness of the timber, or effectively to the thickness of the timber that we need. So this one we're going to set just shy of the thickness, and we're going to again draw that down the length from the face side. We're going to run that marking gauge right the way down that length, and then we're going to rotate it, and we are going to do exactly the same again from that face. So those marks have both been made from the face side, which is there, across to the dead side. And that will give us our lines to plane to as we did before. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use the scrub plane to take some heavy cuts off of this face. So we're going to trim that down, try and get that down to our line before we start using the smoothing plane to smooth it all off. And we're just going to work across that again, picking up all the high spots. And we go evenly across it until we get our cut. And now we're taking some heavier cuts off of that. And we're watching for our line separation on the side there. We've got quite a way to go. And we've got quite a way to go on that side, so we're going to be removing a lot of timber very, very fast. Just working from one side of the timber to the other, remembering that we're using the centre third of the plane to do the heaviest cut. We're about halfway, so we'll take another few cuts. We don't want to go right down to the line because we want to have a little bit of space there to be able to take that final shaving off. And we're pretty much at the line now. As we're at that line, we're going to change over to our smoothing plane and we're going to put the finish on it. But before we do that, we're just going to put our square across it and just check that we've got a nice even cut all the way across the timber. And that is even, it's nice and flat. And we know it's parallel because of the marks we made down the side with the marking gauge. So all we need to do now is literally change over to our smoothing plane from our jack plane. And we're going to take a couple of sheared cuts across the width. Just working across the width. Just smoothing out those high lines on the troughs we made with the scrub plane. So we're just going to look now along the side, and we've got just down to our line, pretty much almost all the way down to our line. So perhaps another couple of passes and that should get that level, and then we can check to see that it's square off of our face edge. So these are our final cuts, our final passes across the timber. And we are almost on that line, as close as we're going to be. So we back the plane off to take a slightly lighter cut, and again we go straight the way down, and we pull off those nice thin shavings again. I'm going to back it off just a little bit more, a little thinner cut. Right across there, and that is on our line. That's it. As you can see, the edge is starting to split, so that is our last cut on this, and we're right down on our line that we made with our marking gauge on that side, and again on that side we're right on it. So we're going to just put our square across it, our straight edge, and just check that we've got no undulations across the width of the timber, and that is absolutely dead flat. And we can again, just as a reference check across there, that's correct. So we'll remove that from the vise, and as we look at that now, because we've gone off of the two faces that were our reference faces, we've now got two parallel faces on the opposite sides, and that is our finished piece of timber. That is now prepared, ready for use. Today we've achieved squaring up some rough stock, and we've got that parallel ready to use for whatever we choose to use it for, really. Quite easy, quite straightforward. It's not been a major task. All you've got to remember is the direction of the grain that you're cutting, which is quite important, and also the two faces, the face side and the face edge. And once you've got to those two sides to work from, everything pretty much falls into place. Quick, it's easy, it's not a major task, bit of effort and a good workout. So if you've enjoyed watching, like, subscribe, and join me again next time when I'm going to be looking at showing you how to do a basic cross halving joint. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for joining us.